Really, what I want to talk about is family, really briefly, and sort of Canada as a family, your military as a family, and what the military does for Canada is a family business, and what you do to support them is a family effort. So I'd just speak very briefly about family. Personal story, I'm a base brat. I grew up in a little army town called Shiloh, Manitoba. Very, very cold part of the country, except for August, when it's very, very hot part of the country. Moved around all over the world with my folks, joined right after my brother, served 36 years, retired a year and a bit ago, and left behind as my contribution my daughter, who is now a captain in the artillery like her dad. She's going to wear the hearing protection that I didn't wear because she thinks hearing aids are geeky. But for us, it's been a bit of a family business. But my wife was part of that family, and she has followed that journey with me, just like the husbands and wives of the men and women in uniform are part of that family too. Rick Hillier, you may have heard of the man. He was our chief of defense 10-ish years ago. Rick had a great line. He said, the uniforms volunteer, right? We're a volunteer country. Unlike some others who are conscripted, we volunteer, but the families are conscripted. They actually end up in a profession that they didn't join, but they end up in it because the mom or dad, the husband or the wife, gave themselves to their country voluntarily. And with that comes a lot of expectation in terms of where you're going to go across our land. You will move when you're told to move. It's one of those sort of voluntold things. And you will deploy to where you get deployed, at sea, in the air, on the land, where and when your nation requires you to do that. And you'll do everything from the back office stuff, the logistics, right to the pointy end stuff at the bayonet when circumstances require. Right, so that's what the uniform experience is, but the family lives that journey too. And of course, that family doesn't get supported unless Canada as a family supports them. And something as simple as finding a family doctor can be dramatic when you leave, say, Toronto, and you get posted to, say, Gander, Newfoundland. And so everything in this game of the family business matters. And for me today, I am welcoming funding innovations into our family because you have just been conscripted, just so you know. Consciousness of the family. It's a new thing in my life. In the 1970s, before you were born, the military was a Vietnam War era. The military, we didn't talk about the military. The Cold War was boring, except for the folks who were writing fiction, great novels. And there wasn't a lot of public consciousness about our own military, nor was there much interest. I'm going to ask you to put yourselves, for those of you who are old enough, remember where you were the day before 9/11. The day before 9/11. And what might have been on your mind about Canada, the world, peace and security, things we don't talk about every day, but what was worrying you or what wasn't? What was on your mind or what wasn't on your mind? The day before, I would suggest that most Canadians are going, yeah, the world's the world. We're doing fine, and we'll be okay. And our military, sure, they do blue beret stuff. And actually, we just came out of a decade of darkness. Let's not go there. But there was an absence of consciousness, not deliberate, and there was an absence of interest, not because people didn't care. It's just they didn't know whether or not they should. The day before. Didn't really think we need one, and if we got one, didn't really know what it's got. The day after 9/11, can you sort of remember the things that were going through your mind about what was different in our mind about the world we live in, our security in that world? And so I'd say all of us had a bit of a holy crap moment, for sure. And some of us were even going, maybe the world has changed. And maybe Canada and Canadians we do as a country need to be taking care of our own and make sure we protect ourselves at home and in the world. And that was huge difference. But the fact that we had a military was sort of a headliner. We have a military, but what was in it, who was in it, our familiarity with it was low, low, low. Okay, we then send 1,000 troops to a place called Kandahar, Afghanistan. Didn't see that coming. So if I was putting money down on a bet in 2000, the word Afghanistan and Kandahar would not even hit the list. But sure enough, 2 years later, we're putting folks into harm's way in a place that we never had heard of before, in an environment we had never saw coming. And it was combat, which is very different for our generation. And so I'm going to ask you to do this other sort of perspective. Do you remember an event called Tarnac Farms, which is where 4 Canadian soldiers were killed by accident by a US F-16 dropping a bomb? And national and global news, 4 Canadian soldiers die in Afghanistan. The day before that event, I remember exactly where it was when it happened. They were my soldiers. So I'm the one who sent them there. The day before that event, most of Canada and Canadians really weren't conscious that they had a military. They knew it was out there doing stuff, but it wasn't very personal. It was sort of it was news headliner stuff, but it wasn't profoundly understood. But the day after that bomb fell, and there was this massive, holy crap, we're in Afghanistan. Holy crap, we got people there. We got soldiers fighting, and some died. There was this like flip, absolute huge flip. And I was in Alberta, and I saw it. It was like huge. And we didn't see what was coming next, which was the reaction of Canadians after that event. It wasn't to act in horror. It wasn't to be aghast. It was to wrap their arms. It was to find that we got hugs from strangers. You couldn't buy a Tim Hortons coffee after that if you were in uniform. Because all of a sudden, Canada and Canadians, by and large, went, not only the day before we didn't really know we had a military, the day after, boy, do we ever know we have one, and they're ours. And we're going to own them. And you remember the first convoys of coffins coming to Toronto from Trenton. And Canadians standing on bridges with flags flying and banners, and the fire trucks. Love the fire trucks. Love firefighters. That is a volunteer firefighter shirt. Yep, check. Amazing, amazing, right? The consciousness went through the roof to the point where Tim Hortons even deployed to Afghanistan eventually with us. You know, I mean, that's pretty dramatic. And all the NHL alumni couldn't get enough of getting on an airplane to go play ball hockey in Kandahar with our troops. None of that could I see that coming, right? You couldn't plan that, you couldn't conceive that, you couldn't contrive it. It had to come from people's guts. And it happened. And we're living it. And so for me, this growing consciousness kept going. So it went to the troops that are serving, and then all of a sudden it went to, holy crap, they got families. And then we started wrapping our arms around families. And then, oh my Lord, they're wounded, they're injured, they're amputees. Support our troops and soldier on. And now we're helping those who've been wounded physically and those who've been wounded emotionally. And we wrap our arms around those. And then folks like me are retiring. And Canada Company is born. That helps military employment transition from the military uniform to a, what the heck am I going to wear today lifestyle. I got to tell you, that's the most dramatic thing for an old soldier is choosing what to wear. That's why it's a family effort. And I listen to my wife, who says, don't wear that. Okay, yes, dear. And it grew. So it went from supporting the troops who were serving to supporting the families to wrapping our arms around the wounded to getting engaged with those who are transitioning. And there's another community that we need to talk about. And that's the ones we didn't know existed. And that's really why we're here. So if I was to suggest to you, I'm going to ask you to join me and my little organization. I'm the patron, by the way, for Soldiers Helping Soldiers as a part-time gig, trying to make a difference in the lives of homeless vets through people who are given of their time and their good deeds to make a difference in their lives. So if you were to be with me today, a member of Soldiers Helping Soldiers, so you are still serving and you have a uniform. And you and I get together on a Wednesday morning and we stand beside a Veterans Affairs caseworker and a Legion staffer and a city police officer. We go for a walk through the market in Ottawa, say, our nation's capital, amongst the homeless. We go to the missions, we go to the soup kitchens, we walk the street. And let's say we do that every second week for 3 years. And at the end of the 3 years, we say, how many vets have we detected amongst the homeless in that community, just that small community, right? Ottawa is not huge. I am in the big smoke here, right? Toronto. So how many veterans do you think we would have found or discovered or identified together? Can you pick a number? Anybody want to hazard a guess? Someone asked me that question, and I said 20. That was my guess, right? 20. The number is 328 as of yesterday. In Ottawa. I mean, really? Now, a veteran, Bill, you're a vet. A veteran is someone who signed up voluntarily, did their basic training, didn't screw up so bad that they didn't pass. They passed, and they served or didn't serve, and they were discharged honorably. Now, that doesn't mean those folks get all the benefits of the multi-decade folks, but by definition, you're a vet. So these are the kind of people who are identifying. Everyone who did the short haul to the long haul, from serving only in Canada to going to some tough places around the planet. In Ottawa alone, 328. The official number for the Government of Canada, from Halifax to Victoria to Yellowknife and Iqaluit, the official number for the Government of Canada is, what do you think the number might be?
2,300, 2,500?
23 to 2,500, probably a low ball, eh? And this doesn't mean persistent homelessness, right? This means the couch surfer, no fixed address, someone who is on the street and then boom, bounce back out. Someone who has chosen that way of life for whatever reason. There's all sorts of ways of being homeless. But what's common to all of them is this. They've disconnected from having a mission in their lives. They've disconnected from having a purpose in their life, and they've lost community. And what's interesting is that for folks who've worn the uniform and who've lived this family of families, that's a huge emotional separation. So the numbers are shocking because not the fact that it exists, but it's that big. Even if it's temporary for some or permanent for others, it's just huge. So the number is very, very real. And what I love about being here with you today is that growth of community is now becoming more aware of itself because it didn't know it had this homeless issue amongst our own vets. We didn't know. But it's nice to know what you don't know, if you know what I mean. And knowing it now allows us to choose whether or not we care. And if we care, with whom are we going to care? And then how are we going to make a difference? And that's what you folks, like I said, you've been conscripted now, so I don't know legally how you can apply that, probably not very well, but morally, you are in. You know the difference of the role of chicken and pig and bacon and eggs? The chicken is involved, but the pig is? Committed. Anyway, so I won't take that too far. So we're now conscious of this. It's a reality. And if you were to just roll the numbers, so if we said 300 over 3 years in Ottawa, it doesn't mean it's 300 every day, right? What's Toronto? Holy moly, right? And the answer is not less than 300. So really, it exists. And so I'm not here to speak specifically to Soldiers Helping Soldiers. That's that uniform volunteer group that is part of what we call the team approach to engaging with, identifying, and helping our veterans. There are so many others who actually do this stuff well, but they do it better when there's a uniform participating. Because what will get the veteran to confess that they're a veteran when you walk past them on the street? It'll be the uniform. And how are you going to identify them? How are they going to self-identify? Because they're going to say something they didn't mean to say. They're going to say, "Hi, Major." Whoa, only a vet would know what that 2 stripes in a bar means, right? Or, "Hey, Sergeant Major," or "Hey, Private." It's something as simple as that. It's like, boom, you're now on the radar. Beep, 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 beep. And we do, in the military, we call find, fix, and strike. We do this benevolently. We detect them, we recognize them, and then we identify them. And by name. And the name leads to a service number. The service number leads to a case officer from VAC, Veterans Affairs, a connection with the Legion. See what I'm getting at? So it's a team effort. And so I'm not here just to speak to Soldiers Helping Soldiers, but to the whole idea that the team of teams that today, every day, is dealing with homelessness in communities across the land. Some who don't even know there's veterans in those communities. They can use help. And the ones that are now identifying the veterans in there can really use some help. And they are the legions. They are the community services. They are the faith-based and volunteer organizations in our hometowns. And they're the volunteers, if you will, that can definitely use more resources than they have available today. Two quick vignettes. A month ago in Ottawa, a individual who had been detected on the street and recognized by name, but he wouldn't surrender any information. Like, so this is not everyone's going to volunteer who they are and how they got here. Phoned in to a contact in Soldiers Helping Soldiers and said, I'm going to commit suicide. Phone call to the Ottawa City Police, who are partnered. Police officers go grab the individual. They found where he was, put him into protective care, medical care. And then immediately, Veterans Affairs caseworkers on the scene, social workers on the scene, Legion does a contact. Long story short, the agencies who could take them from despair have landed that person now in a place where they're independently residing. They are receiving the benefits that they were due, but they disconnected from when they went homeless. And they're getting the social and the medical care they need, to including dealing with mental health issues. And that person's on the upswing. They're off the street, bottom line. Yesterday, they had in the market in Ottawa, we do a thing called peer counseling. Do you feel better talking to a buddy, or do you feel it's easier to talk to a stranger? It's easier to talk to buddies, right? In the military, we call them battle buddies. In the Air Force, they call them wingmen. Navy, they call them shipmates. So buddies matter. And even if you don't know each other personally, but if you come from the cloth, that same cloth, that fraternity is there. Hockey players have it, unless they're Canadians versus Toronto. They don't have that. But anyways, this fraternity exists. And so what they did was they've been having these sessions of peer counseling, where from the homeless community, the veterans within them would come together once a week and speak with each other. It's almost like a circle, a Native Canadian circle, where you're telling your story. One member of that circle is a Canadian veteran of the Vietnam War. We didn't go to war in Vietnam, but this Canadian did. He came home and he was traumatized. He's been on the street for over 10 years, living in a mission, and he's happy to stay there. That's his story. Anyways, this fella would say nothing about his experience. He wouldn't share anything with his battle buddies or his wingmen or shipmates. But one of the other homeless vets at that session had a service dog. You know, the animals that provide you that moral comfort. This service dog, when the circle came around to this fella and everybody's waiting for him to speak, he won't say anything. This service dog walked over to that fella and sat in front of him and laid his jowls on his knees, right? The puppy dog eyes, right? How can you resist puppy dog eyes? And this fella, who was not in any mood to communicate to people, looked down, saw this dog, and for the next 45 minutes, he told his story to the dog. Now, I'm not sure how much of it the dog remembers, but all those people in the room do. And like a break, eh? And these are the small things that are emblems of, or examples of, how the little interventions can have a huge effect. And now where he goes next, we'll see. But people are now way more familiar with the story and what's keeping them on the street than they were the day before. And in terms of the numbers, of the 324, I think as of yesterday, over 80 successfully transitioned off the street in that 3-year period. So I'm just talking about one small population center, right? So let's take that model and let's export it. I'm going to do business speak. Let's land and expand. This is very much a model that needs to expand, because the need is very, very real. The partnerships are very real, but they're not necessarily formed, and nor are they necessarily adequately resourced. So the conscripts, your place in this. So let me share with you this last little story about why what you do, who you are, why who you are and what you do really, really matters. I'm going to ask for a hand of all those who have not seen the movie Top Gun. Okay, good. All right, all right. How's the person in the car? Have you seen Top Gun? Yeah, she's saying yes. Okay, good. Yeah, okay. So it's okay. It's a generational thing. You've heard of Tom Cruise, though, right? Anyways, Tom Cruise in the movies is a Top Gun pilot. That's the Hollywood picture. In the real world, there are Top Gun pilots in the real world. They're called U.S. Navy aviators. They fly off aircraft carriers. In the period of the Vietnam War, back in the early 70s, there was a pilot whose name was Charlie Plum, and he was flying off the USS Kitty Hawk, and one day on one of his missions, he got shot down. So what happens when your plane blows up underneath you? You eject. So he ejected, he landed, and he was taken prisoner by the Viet Cong. And he endured 4 years of prisonership. And trust me, those days, they don't have conventions in those days. So let's just say he survived 4 years of being a prisoner under the Viet Cong and was released back to the United States. He got back there, he sort of left the military, reintegrated with society and his family, and got on with his life. 10 years later, Charlie and his wife, minding their own business, were sitting in a restaurant having a meal. And the stranger walks across the room and says, "Hey, I know you, you're Charlie Plum." Charlie goes, "I am." The stranger says to Charlie, he said, "Charlie, you flew off the USS Kitty Hawk in the Vietnam War." Charlie says, "That's true." He said, "Charlie, you got shot down. You were a prisoner of war. You survived 4 years of being a prisoner." Charlie goes, "That's all true." And this fella says to Charlie, "Charlie, I just want you to know how happy I am to see that you're all right." And Charlie's wheels are spinning like crazy. And he goes, "Well, that's awful kind of you, but do you mind me asking who you are?" And Charlie, this fella says to Charlie, he says, "Yeah, I'm the guy who packed your parachute. I guess it worked." True story. Charlie has this rush of revelation. I'm getting goosebumps. I've told the story 750 times. But Charlie had this rush of revelation that when he was taking off and landing on the flight deck, you know, the Top Gun silk scarf thing, he had no clue. 5 decks down, there's Buddy, bagging and tagging parachutes. So the day he would need it, his life would be saved. And that revelation to him blew open the doors on his understanding of all the parachute packers in his life. Trained them, housed them, took care of them, took care of his family, reintegrated them. People serving him. And Charlie clearly did something about that because he wrote the darn book that I read that allows me to tell you the story. And Charlie is the biggest proponent of parachute packing you could imagine because he is the guy with the biggest epiphany about the fact that he didn't know they existed. So does that sort of serve like a metaphor for who you are and what you're doing? We see the pointy end of our business. 10% of our uniforms are pointy end. 70 plus are everything that allows them to train, survive, move, shoot, communicate, endure, recover. You see what I'm getting at? It's huge. It's absolutely huge. And in life, it's the very, very same thing. We just don't know who's packing parachutes for us. Our teachers pack for us. Whether or not they did it well or not, you tell me. Society, neighbors pack for you, families pack for you. And fundamentally, what you're doing is you're putting ammo in the bins of the folks who are going to be at the pointy end of serving veterans in places we didn't even know they existed. That is in the homeless communities. You see what I'm getting at? Amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. We are the supply chain of the ammo that needs to go in the hands of the warriors, the volunteers who are on the streets, identifying, serving, and taking care of those that we didn't know we'd lost. Is that a fair proposition? So you can Google the crap out of Charlie Plum because he loves that his story gets told. He loves that it gets shared. And if you can, if you're in the mood, share it with your family. Share it with your family. And when they say, what did I do today? I helped pack some parachutes. Ha! You want me to tell you why? But I'm real, eh? I mean, this is bone level, DNA level purpose. And you got to do a lot of things to allow that to happen. So for me and our military family and the family that we'd forgotten, that we lost, on their behalf, thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. Thank you for being conscripted into our expanding family. And in the great old Canadian way, I got to say thank you, A. Thanks, folks.